The haunted post office. On the main road of a town, there stood an old post office building. Due to its age, only a few official tasks were carried out there. This particular building was famous for one reason. No officer ever stayed there for long, and no one wanted to be posted there. On August 5th, a new officer was posted there. The officer's name was Steve. The job was very important to Steve, so he immediately accepted the offer. As part of the job, he was provided accommodation in a service quarter within the same building. Eager to start his work, Steve quickly finished his shifting and got to work. When he first entered the building, he felt a strange coldness in the air. Upon entering his room, he felt as if someone had already been there before him. However, dismissing it as a figment of his imagination, Steve began moving his belongings. That night, when he returned from dinner, he found his room in complete disarray. It was very odd since he had just organized everything a short while ago. Then, he noticed the open window and thought that perhaps the wind had caused the mess. Steve was very tired, so he went straight to bed. In the middle of the night, there was a loud knock on his door, waking him up. It was unusual for someone to visit at that hour. When he opened the door, there was a man standing in a watchman's uniform. Due to the darkness, Steve couldn't see his face clearly. Steve asked why the watchman had woken him up so late, but despite repeatedly asking, the watchman didn't respond. When Steve turned on the light to see his face, the watchman suddenly disappeared. There was no one in front of Steve now. For a moment, Steve was scared and couldn't understand what had just happened. Thinking about it, he went back to bed. But as soon as he lay down, the knocking on the door started again. This time, Steve angrily opened the door. The same watchman was standing there, smiling. The watchman explained that he had gone to check the water tank. He mentioned that he stayed at a nearby lodge and had been taking care of the building for years. He informed Steve that the tap in his bathroom might have been left open, causing the tank to empty. And that's why he had woken him up. Steve checked and found that the tap was indeed open. After that night, Steve gradually became friends with the watchman. They would talk a lot every night. Since the watchman had the evening shift, he would come only in the evening. A month passed this way. After a month, Steve received an email from the office. The email contained some details related to the office, but as Steve read it, he was shocked. The email mentioned appointing a watchman for the safety of the office. Steve thought it must be a mistake, but what he found out afterward left him terrified. When he called the head office, he was informed that there had been no watchman for years. Different caretakers had been assigned, but none had stayed long. Moreover, there was no lodge around the post office. All this information seemed very strange to Steve. He began to suspect that the watchman he met every night might be a thief. Steve decided to avoid the watchman from now on. But that night, the watchman didn't come to meet Steve at all. Steve thought about the watchman as he fell asleep. But once again, late at night, there was a loud knock on the door. When Steve opened the door, the same watchman was standing there. He started talking to Steve normally, just like always. But there was something odd in Steve's behavior, which the watchman noticed. Steve tried to avoid looking at him, and despite being asked repeatedly, Steve didn't say anything, which made the watchman angry. Suddenly, the lights in Steve's room began flickering intensely. As soon as Steve looked at the watchman, he was horrified. The watchman's face had turned demonic, and he began muttering something in an unknown language in a loud voice. As the watchman chanted, strange, terrifying sounds began echoing through the room. Steve was now extremely frightened, and the watchman slowly started moving towards him. He suddenly grabbed Steve by the neck and began strangling him. The watchman, who had now turned into a demon, kept saying that Steve had also rejected his friendship and that he would punish him for it. Steve started screaming, "Please, please, let me go." Suddenly, a few workers who were working in the building heard Steve's screams and rushed to his room. As soon as they arrived, the watchman vanished. Steve was holding his neck, trembling with fear. The workers gave him some water and left. Steve spent the whole night shivering in fear of the watchman. The next morning, when he saw the marks on his neck in the mirror, he realized that what had happened to him was no dream. The following day, Steve asked around and learned from an old man that there used to be a watchman in that building about 20 years ago who had a limp. Many officers at the post office used to make fun of him, and one day, the watchman jumped out of one of the office windows and ended his life. After hearing this, Steve left the office the same day. When asked for a reason, Steve didn't provide any answers. He just wanted to leave as soon as possible. Steve may never be able to forget this terrifying experience, and the watchman's spirit might forever wander the post office in search of a friend. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Indie History.